Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Anthony Bosman, David Nelsen, Q&A with our live audience, and host Anil Kanda. Today's episode, Can Math and Biology Reveal God? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
How many of you were good at math as kids? For me, math was never my strongest subject. The only thing I ever wanted to add were lunch periods and recesses. No wonder I have so many problems to solve nowadays. But our next guest says math isn't just about test scores or calculators. It's a way of seeing God's order, beauty, and nature in a whole new way. He received his bachelor's from Stanford and his PhD from Rice University, and is currently the chair of the math department at Andrews University. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Anthony Bosman. Dr. Bosman, is it true you really like math?
I do. You see it everywhere.
Why do you love math out of all the other subjects?
Oh, that's a great question. Ever since I was young, I just thought in numbers.
Wonderful. Let's talk about math now. Why do math patterns show up in nature?
Well, first let me give you an example of it. You have that pineapple over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you grab that pineapple,
Okay.
and in this pineapple, if you hand it to me really fast,
Okay.
you can see you have two different kinds of spirals. You have spirals going this way, and spirals going this way. So if we count the spirals going this direction,
Okay.
we're going to lock it in with my thumb.
Okay.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to my thumb. So 8 spirals going that direction.
All right.
Now we're going to count the spirals going the other direction.
Okay.
So I'm going to lock it in with my thumb. 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and back where I started.
All right.
So 8 one direction, 13 the other.
Okay.
Incredible.
Right.
So why is that incredible?
Yes, I'm still waiting for the answer.
So 8 and 13 are special numbers in mathematics.
Okay.
They show up in something called the Fibonacci sequence. You heard of that before?
Yes.
So Fibonacci is where you begin with 1 and 1, and then each next number is the sum of the previous 2. So 1 and 1 gives you 2, 1 and 2 gives you 3, 2 and 3 gives you 5, 3 and 5 gives you 8, and 5 and 8 gives you 13. The Fibonacci numbers show up in the pineapple. And it doesn't just show up in the pineapple. Grab that sunflower. If you look at the spirals of the inside of a sunflower and count them, you get Fibonacci numbers. You get 34 going one direction and 55 going the other direction, which are the next 2 numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. And it's not just pineapples and sunflowers. You can look at pine cones. They show up there. You can look at galaxies. You can look at seashells. The Fibonacci numbers show up across the universe.
So you're seeing math patterns, and especially as a math professor, I'm good you're able to see this. You're seeing math patterns throughout our world, throughout the universe. What is that telling you?
Right. So when mathematicians talk about this, and physicists, for example, Eugene Wigner was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and he wrote a paper called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics. And throughout this paper, when he looks at the fact that mathematics shows up throughout the world, he calls it miraculous. 12 times in this paper, he used the word miraculous to describe it. And so here's a scientist wrestling with the fact that somehow mathematics describes the universe. He throws out all the scientific vocabulary and uses the theological word miraculous to describe it. So for me, when I listen to mathematicians and physicists wrestle with this, it's such a clear signpost to the fact that there is a creator.
Now, some people might say, wait a minute, you're saying math is discovered, but I think math is created or invented. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a bit of both, right? When Isaac Newton looked at the data for how the planets orbit and came up with his universal law of gravitation, right? He used notation that he had invented to describe the orbit of the planets. He comes up with his law of gravitation. But he's not imposing something onto the world. He's actually discovering something about the world. And the way we know this is he discovers this in the 1600s. In the 1700s, we find a new planet, Uranus. And when Uranus was discovered, it didn't quite fit the equation of Isaac Newton. His equation seemed to be wrong. But then people realized, well, it could fit the equation if there was something else pulling on Uranus, pulling it a little bit further so it's just not quite exactly what the equation said from this one perspective. But if you include this extra planet, it would fit the equation. So people hypothesized there must be an extra planet beyond Uranus. Now, we had no evidence of this yet. The telescope wasn't strong enough to perceive it. But 100 years later, we discovered the planet that the equation predicted, which was Neptune. And so what you see going on here is the mathematics isn't just something we impose upon the world, but it's actually describing the fundamental structure of the world. It makes predictions that we then go out and confirm.
What you're telling me and telling our audience is, look, this isn't something we're just making up. We're seeing math in the very fabric of the universe. So does that mean math is the language of God?
Yeah, so that's what Galileo said. When God created, he used the language of mathematics, right? And people have wrestled with, why is the universe so mathematical? And some have tried to resist concluding God. There's a professor at MIT. He concludes the reason that the universe is mathematical is because the universe is just a mathematical object. You and I are mathematics that is somehow self-conscious and alive. And it's kind of an absurd, ridiculous theory, but it's showing the lengths to which people are wrestling with the fact that there's this deep structure to the world. When I talk to my physicist friends about this, I have one friend who's a physicist, comes from a secular background, doesn't have any Christian commitments, but he told me that this is what keeps him up at night. Why is there this mathematical structure? This keeps me up at night. And then he says, I know how you as a Christian make sense of it. So he as a secular physicist can look at me and say, I know how you as a Christian. He sees how it points to God, right? And so it's not just something that you read into it, but it's actually the structure of the world is strong evidence that there is a creator.
That's really incredible. This is the first time I'm getting excited about math right now. You know, when you think about the theories behind how this universe came about, the majority of scientists say, well, there was this Big Bang. Before that, there was this, essentially the laws of physics were broken down, the singularity, and then some quantum fluctuation, and boom, the universe began. Stephen Hawking said, no, we don't need any kind of creation or origin. The laws of gravity have always been there. And then you got the multiverse theory out there that especially superhero movies are really interested in, right? And then there's theism. Based upon your study of mathematics, let's lay aside the church, let's lay aside the Bible. Which of those makes much more sense and is inconsistent with the data of mathematics?
So for much of human history, we just assumed the universe always existed, right? The ancient Greeks, they thought it was always here. And that's why is the universe here? It's always been here, right? But the discovery of cosmology is the universe had a beginning. And so now how do we make sense of the fact the universe had a beginning? The Big Bang Theory is just the recognition that there was an initial point of time. Now, one way to try to explain how the universe had a beginning is to try to appeal somehow the laws of physics did. This is what Stephen Hawking claims. He says, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. But when I think about what the law of gravity is, it's just a mathematical description of the world, right? Do you have a wallet on you?
I don't. I wish I did.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you think about pull out your wallet, you can use mathematics to describe how much money you have. Maybe it's like a 20 and a 5, 25, mathematics describes it. But you can't scribble down plus 100 and have $100 pop into existence, right? I mean, that'd be great if you could. But mathematics doesn't have creative power. It only has descriptive power. So when people think that the laws of physics can somehow create the world, it's a confusion. The laws of physics are just describing how the world works. It can't describe what actually created the universe. And so I think the fact the universe had a beginning coheres so well with the biblical story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? For thousands of years, the biblical text said it, and now science is catching up, and we can see, indeed, there was a beginning to the universe.
Well, let me push back a little bit here. Here you are, you're saying, wait a minute, I think theism is the best answer. God created this universe, right? But how do we know which God? I mean, for the Hindus, they got Brahma, right? You got, for the Muslims, they got Allah. You can go to the Norse gods, you can go to Greek, get into the Titans and Zeus or whoever, right? But why do you think the Christian God seems to be the most reasonable source behind this universe.
Yeah. So one of the unique things about the biblical text is that it doesn't give a story of where God came from. If you compare the account of Genesis with that of the Babylonians or the Greeks or the Egyptians, they all have theogonies, which are stories of where the gods came from. That originally there was chaos, or there was water, or there was darkness, or whatever the original material was. And then from that, the gods emerge. And so the gods themselves have origin stories.
Nature creates gods.
That's right. But what you see in Genesis is the opposite. In the beginning, God. It's just God. And then God creates everything, the heavens and the earth. And what we now see is, indeed, nature has a beginning. Right? So if nature has a beginning, then you can't have God coming out of nature. And so I see what's going on in the biblical text has been confirmed now, the fact that there's a beginning to the universe.
Dr. Bosman, let me come at another angle, but how do you know God doesn't have a beginning? If we're going to apply the idea of something with the cause and beginning, why don't we apply that to God? Why is God immune from this beginning? Aren't we going into this problem of infinite regress?
Yeah. So the question is, if God created the universe, then who created God? Some
Right.
people ask this, right? The reason we want to explain what created the universe is because the universe had a beginning. Right? The fact we can look at the cosmological evidence and see the universe is expanding. You play that story in reverse. If it's expanding, you go back to those initial point. But it's only because the universe had a beginning that you ask what created the universe. The belief in the Christian God isn't a belief of a God that had a beginning. Psalm 90 verse 2 says God is from everlasting to everlasting. Right? God is without beginning. God is necessary. There's nothing else that explains the existence of God. So believing in a God that had as a beginning is not the Christian God. We call that an idol. That's a false God, right?
Now, since we're talking about God and eternity, let's talk about eternity, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why we have this bag of sugar, but I'm sure you have an explanation behind why we have this bag of sugar.
Yeah. So when we talk about big numbers, a million, a billion, a trillion, a lot of times they just all sound the same to us, right? What is a million? What is a billion? You know, some of us maybe have $1 million, but most of us, they're just big numbers. So I wanted to visualize what some of these big numbers are. So if you open that bag of sugar, I did the calculation this morning. In a bag of sugar, I'm not going to ask you to count them. It'd take too long. But there's about 1 million grains of sugar in there.
Okay.
So if you pour it out in here, we can see what a million looks like. Now, as you're pouring it out, how long would it take you, you think, to actually count those one by one by one?
Oh, several lifetimes.
Yeah. Well, it's not too long. If you take 1 per second to count up to 1 million, it would take about 11.5 days. So just shy of 2 weeks.
Okay.
So if you have 2 weeks that you're free, you can just count through those grains of sugar and you can get up to 1 million.
By the way, this is only something mathematicans think about.
Right, that's right. Now, if instead of counting to 1 million, you want to get up to 1 billion, it's going to be a lot more than this. There's going to be 1,000 of those, right? To get up to 1 billion, how long do you think it would take you to count to 1 billion?
I can't even compute that.
So if you're doing 1 number per second, it would be about 32 years.
Okay.
I just celebrated my 1,000th birthday a couple of years ago. So 32 years is 1 billion seconds. Now, these are big numbers, right? But compared to eternity, right? If you think of each of these, instead of being a second a year, this is your life. That's 80 little years, right? And that's compared to 1 million.
Right.
But compared to eternity, this is nothing. So the mathematician Blaise Pascal, he was a mathematician, a theologian, he reflected on eternity and he said, you know, so often we think about the present and we magnify the present as if it's everything. We're thinking about what I'm going to do tonight, what I'm going to do this weekend, everything about the present. But at the same time, we never think about eternity. We never think about the whole. He says by doing so, we magnify the present to make it everything, and we diminish eternity to make it nothing. And so what mathematics teaches me is it reminds me that, okay, let's keep things in perspective, right? Let's keep just the moment of our life in perspective of the rest of eternity.
That's really incredible, and I appreciate you helping us to zoom out and see the bigger picture. You know, speaking of eternity, and we think about God, I mean, eternity is one of those things, it's like you keep going back before the creation of this world. You go back before the creation of this, you know, the angels, and you keep going back in your mind before God had created anything, before there was anything that was a creature or anything that was part of created order. And we get back to when it was just God.
Right.
What was God doing from eternity past?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to wrestle with because whenever you think of God, you might think of like God in heaven. But as you said, even the angels had a beginning, right? Even God's throne, it's just God. What is that ultimate reality? As I've grappled with this, there's a line of Jesus that's helped me. Jesus prays in John 17. So towards the end of his life, coming to the cross, Jesus prays to the Father. And he says, Father, you loved me from before the foundation of the world. And so the picture there is there's just God. But the Christian conception of God is rich. God exists as three persons, as Father, Son, and Spirit. And so from eternity past, God existed in love relationship, the Father loving the Son. When Jesus thinks back to eternity past, he said, you loved me. And so the thing that fills eternity in the Christian view is God's love. And that's what filled eternity past, and then that's what fills eternity future, right? Sometimes I think about, what am I going to do forever, right? If I take seriously the claim that Christ gives us eternal life, like there's some cool math that we can do, right? But only for so long. What is going to fill that eternity? And for the Christian, it's that we get caught up in the love of God. The same thing that filled eternity past, God's love, fills eternity future.
And what you're telling us is, look, it may be difficult to comprehend, but God was in relationship.
But I think it's good for us to think about this because so often we get caught up thinking this is what it is, reality, right? Like this material stuff is reality. And therefore my life should be about accumulating nice material things,
right,
or whatever it might be. But it's like actually, all of material reality is just a blimp compared to the eternity that preceded it. And so when you zoom out even further now, right? You zoom out like all of this that's material, that is just such a small moment compared to the greater fundamental reality of God's love. And so that means the things I should be about in this world are relationships. It's about the love of God, showing that to people, right? Things that endure, things that will last forever.
Who knew equations could point to the divine? We've been talking with Dr. Anthony Bosman about seeing God in math, from the Fibonacci sequences to the mystery of eternity. But stick around because next we're going to the other side of the building into the biology department. We're heading from equations to ecosystems. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope at Night. If math showed us God's order, then our next guest takes us into God's wonder, the world of living things. He spent years studying the complexity and creativity of life on Earth, and the more he looked, the more he's seen a designer's hand. Please join me in welcoming biologist, professor, and researcher, Dr. David Nelsen. Dr. Nelsen, when did you know you wanted to become a biologist?
From the earliest moments. Really, I was 4 years old, and I grew up kind of going to the library, and every book that I wanted to take from the library had animals in it. So that's
Did you like bugs growing up?
Yes,
You
absolutely.
know, it's surprising. I find this common pattern amongst biologists. They all wanted to be biologists when they're younger, and they all loved bugs and snakes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I knew that. Now, what are your favorite creatures then?
I like arachnids, so spiders and scorpions and things. That's what I've been studying for the past couple decades. But pretty much any animal, the stranger, the better.
Okay, that's really interesting. You know, believe it or not, when I was in 6th grade, you can go back to my little yearbook and it says, Anil, Kanda, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I put entomologist.
Oh, nice.
You know, someone who wants to study bugs.
Yeah.
By the way, if you don't know what that means. So, yes, so you're interested in arachnids, huh?
Yeah.
What's particular one?
I studied black widows in grad school, and then now I'm studying a Joro spider, which is an Asian spider that's come over to the U.S. and is spreading throughout the U.S. So I've been studying that for the past couple of years now.
So you don't kill spiders when you see them, I'm assuming.
In my home, no. I let them, I release them back outside, show them to my daughters, and then let them go.
When you look at creation through the biologist lens, do you see God in creationism?
Yeah, I do. I think that there is a profound kind of symmetry that happens in nature, that no matter what kind of scale you look at, you start to see the same patterns. Think of it as a whole, right? So when you think of a theistic point of view, you think about a top-down where you have a creator, you have information, and you see that information pervades everything. But when you have a bottom-up, like a materialist perspective, where you have to start by creating things from nothing and that you have to build everything and things have to be emergent, it's hard to fathom how you get to a world like the one that we inhabit.
Oh, that's really interesting. But, you know, a lot of people, though, who argue intelligent design and we see order in nature, there's still a very broken world that we're a part of.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a challenge that believers have. And they said, you know, God is in nature, we can see order. Dr. Bosman shared with us the Fibonacci sequence and other things that are in nature. Yet we see very much a violent nature, a nature that is full of red tooth and claw.
Yeah.
But then how do we make sense of that tension?
Well, I think, you know, the Bible gives us an understanding, a framework for understanding that the world that we inhabit now is not the one that was originally the ideal, but it's still a very good world, right? It's still a world that functions. And even in spite of the fact that you have all of this kind of red and tooth and claw, right, that you have this struggle for existence, there's still a profound harmony and symmetry within everything. So you still see the vestiges of that present. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think that's the framework you are describing makes sense of the intelligent design and then the brokenness and violence and suffering of nature. You know, going back to the other question, where else do you see in nature when you look at it and you, from a biologist perspective, and you say, man, God is here. His fingerprints are all over this.
Yeah, yeah. I think about it when I think about an organism, like what an organism is. If we take just an example, maybe like a tiger or something, it's not just that one thing, right? If I zoom into it, I can see its organs and organ systems, then I can see tissues, and at every level that I see the same kind of pattern over and over again, all the way down to the biochemical pathways, and they're incredibly complex, where everything has to have this harmony and unity. It all has to be present together. And so I end up with this Russian doll system where the further I go down, I still see the same pattern of this complete system. And so organisms tend to be these systems within systems. But even as you pull out, the system doesn't go away, right? A tiger is an ecosystem itself. It's got a whole bunch of bacteria and other fungi and things in its own body. And then it's part of an ecosystem, and then that ecosystem is part of a biosphere. So it keeps on going up and up. So no matter whether I go up to higher order things or down to the fine details, I still see the same process across the entire thing.
So what are these systems telling you?
To me, they're telling me that there has to be some kind of overall purpose, right? There's an intentionality there, because why do you see it across every single scale that you look at? And it's not like that even when we drill down to the atom, that it goes away. It's just our ability to detect it has gone away. We don't have the technology to go further. But for all intents and purposes, like, it seems like it could continue even further down and it can continue further up. So to me, that kind of speaks to this idea of like an eternity where it's unfathomable, but it's ending. Like the discovery potential can keep on going and going and going no matter which direction you want to go. There's more, and it kind of is inexhaustible.
Wow, so you're seeing cities within cities within cities
absolutely.
within cities, and it just keeps going.
Yeah. Every organism is its own microcosm, no matter the scale that you're looking at.
That's
right?
really
From the
incredible.
cell all the way up.
Dr. Nelsen, but the thing is, most biologists I know, now they will say to you, you know, biology has nothing to do with atheism, that's a philosophy, but most biologists I know aren't Bible-believing Christians like you. But how has the conversation between faith and science changed?
Yeah, it's very different now, even in my own lifetime. In the scientific societies that I'm a part of, even now they'll have statements where they acknowledge that they accept all faiths, you know, in orientations and all these kinds of things. So it's much more an accepting place to be.
So there's more
Christian
openness
scientists.
to other
Absolutely.
ideas.
Yes, absolutely. And you'll be surprised, and in fact, I'm even surprised by the colleagues that I have, and I go to these meetings and I don't know them super well, but I'll see on like a social media post and it's like, oh, they go to church. I didn't know that, right? So it's a lot more common than you would think it is, because society has shifted to being a little more open to having science and faith mix. And you can you don't have to be ashamed, right? There are reasons to believe, and you can do good science and follow God. That's, yeah.
And, as you're saying this, I'm thinking people will sometimes ask the question, why are many scientists atheists? But as we're listening to you, we should be asking, but why are many scientists believers?
Yeah. There's a lot more belief, and I think there's a search, right? Because meaning is really, really important, right? You want something that's transformative, that takes you someplace and makes you better. And I think a completely random process, while it allows you maybe to create your own meaning, ultimately it doesn't fulfill in the same way.
When you look at the theory of evolution, just the big picture idea, what do you see are big problems with the theory of evolution?
To answer, I want to back up a second and say, I want to understand the worldview that is using the theory, because that has a large role in where you take the theory, right? So in a materialist perspective, where I only think that the only thing that exists or the only thing that matters is matter and energy, then I have to understand biodiversity through evolution as creating everything through this random process, right? But evolution doesn't go away when I come at it from theism, because evolution is just about how organisms change, and we think that God creates a system where organisms are adaptable, that they can change and they can fill ecological niches, right? So it's not like it goes away, right? So that's kind of one of the things that I kind of stress with my students is don't throw out evolution altogether, separate what it is from the worldview that's predominantly behind it, and usually the textbooks that we're using, that's a materialist worldview who's using evolution or talking about it.
Right.
So I think, though, the problem overall, when we think about it from the materialist perspective, is you have to have randomness, right? And the thing that is going to create this change is going to be these random mutations. And so you have this problem of novelty. Where do new things that have never existed before come from? And evolution itself doesn't give a very satisfactory, especially what we call the modern synthesis version of evolution, doesn't really give a good account of where that newness comes from, because the mechanism itself, we know from observations and experiment, tends to take something and degrade it, not improve it. And so you have to have deep time in order to fix that.
Right, and so what I'm hearing from you is if you distill evolution down to its most basic, essential definition, it's change over time. And that's something we can witness.
Yes, absolutely.
But then what if someone says to you, but then if we believe in change over time, what's so hard about believing that we descended from other primates?
So I think the question, from a Christian perspective or from a theistic perspective, I'm not asking myself whether evolution happens, I'm asking how much can it explain, right? And that's an open question where I have to evaluate the evidence and say, what would need to happen in order for this organism or this group to give rise to this other group who have these other characters that didn't exist before? And that's where it starts to break down, where, for me at least, where I don't see evolution as this creative process that can give you something brand new that hasn't existed. It can take things that already exist and diversify them into lots of different forms. But to create something completely new from scratch, it doesn't really do a good job of that.
Okay, so I get that you don't believe that, as far as creating something brand new.
Yeah.
And maybe you're already answering this question, but then do you believe that evolution might be the reason behind why we think that maybe mankind, as some people hold, came from, let's say, apes? Do you think that to be true?
So I think that there's two things that are possible. I'm going to take it away from humans and primates for a second and take it to a different group of organisms that maybe would be a little bit easier to start with. Okay. So let's just think of dogs, right? So do we think that God created all the different forms of dogs? Or is it possible that a wolf, a coyote, domestic dogs, they have a common ancestor, right? So I think there's some amount of change, right, that is possible, and that those things probably do share a common ancestor, maybe even foxes. Right? But when you start to get to different groups there are some big fundamental jumps, that's where I start to question and say, okay, what could it really do this, right? Could you do this in a blind process? And I'm not sure. I don't think that you can, right?
There are big problems with that.
Yeah, there are big problems with that.
So you
but
can
where
see-
you draw the line specifically, like for every group, that's a case-by-case basis.
Right. So like you're talking about within the dog family, there's variability, and you have, everything from coyotes to foxes to Pomeranians and poodles, right?
But bears versus dogs, are we going to have a common ancestor between them, right? So I'm not sure about that because they seem to be fundamentally different. But you have some groups, my favorite, spiders, that you've got 500,000 species, right? Could they all share a common ancestor? So there's times where you can have quite a bit of variation that could emerge through an evolutionary process. Probably not the modern synthesis. I think there's another version of evolution that's better. But there are some things where maybe I don't think that that's the case.
Change over time, adaptation, but then there are limits to that.
Yeah. And you're searching for those. As a scientist, we're searching for the limits.
Right.
Right.
Dr. Bosman, what would you say?
Yeah, I think if your worldview is that you are the result of an unguided process, right, then the question emerges of, well, why should we trust our thoughts? Darwin himself wrestled with this question, right? It's like he asked, who would trust the thoughts of a monkey's mind, right? And so the Christian philosopher Alvin Platina has developed this argument against naturalistic evolution, saying if naturalistic evolution is true, then it undermines human rationality, right? There's basically two views. Did matter come from a mind, or did mind come from matter? If first there was just matter, stuff, and mind is emergent, then it doesn't explain why the mind is rational, why we can get at truth, right? Maybe explains why we can survive, but why are we able to understand that deep structure of reality? Whereas if matter itself is derivative of a mind, God, and we are made in the image of God, then it explains why we are able to understand that deep structure of the world. And so I think what separates humans from monkeys or chimpanzees or common ancestor, whatever it might be, I think as a human, I can do a reflection on the world is fundamentally different than what an animal can do. And beyond just knowing that structure, I then also find within myself a spiritual longing, right? This search for meaning, the search of purpose, that seems quite distinctive, a fundamentally different quality than what we found in the animal. So while there may be some superficial physiological similarities between us and various animals, we look at the activities of the human mind, our ability to grasp and understand the world around us, our ability to search for meaning and purpose. And that's something that seems to really cry out for a different kind of explanation. I think that's what Genesis offers us. It says, we're actually made in the image of the one who created the world. That's why we have this deep interest and curiosity in the world and a deep longing to be at home with the one who created us.
In regards to biology and the study of nature, when you're looking out into nature, what is nature itself telling you? Not just about the idea that God is behind it, but more specifically the character of the creator behind it.
So, I mean, when I look at it from this theistic lens, I see a creator that cares, right? That is a part of something very grand and unified, right? That ecology calls me into responsibility, both to my fellow man, but also to nature itself. That seems to be an important theme for God, because God creates a world where it's so rich, and a lot of it is actually can't get at it, right? It's not for us. But God made this whole world with so much information, so much things in it for all these other organisms. How can I not also care about them? So I have to care about you, right? I have to care about my fellow man, but I have to care about nature in this grander sense too, and that speaks to a very big God.
Wonderful. We have much more to talk about. Whether it's through a stethoscope, a microscope, or a math equation, we've just heard how creation is crying out to tell us you're not an accident, you're loved, and you're part of a much bigger story. We need to go to our break, but before we do, I just want to remind you to please visit our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight, where you can view previous episodes and also download this season's free gift. When we come back, we'll open up the floor for questions from our live studio audience, so stick around. Welcome back to Hope at Night. Math and science is a journey, not just a set of answers. And since we're on that journey, we get to ask some questions. Who has our first question? Right over there.
Dr. Nelsen, have you ever been injured by a spider?
So this year we did an experiment with that invasive species I told you about, and we intentionally got bit. Now, we thought that it wasn't going to be a problem, and it turns out we were right. It was not a problem. It's probably less than a mosquito bite, right? So it resolves itself really, really quickly, but we wanted to show step by step that was going to be the case and people didn't have to be afraid.
What kind of spider was this?
It's this big Joro spider.
Okay.
Yeah.
How big is this?
Probably like this.
Oh.
Like it's a very large, it's the largest orb weaving spider that we have in
And
the
you
area.
got bit by it?
Yeah, held it. Yep, held it, put it on my skin until it bit.
What did it feel like?
So the bite is the worst part. It's not that bad. Did draw a little bit of blood, but then once you let go of it, it releases and tries to run away. And then 30 minutes later,
I mean, were you near a hospital? I have to know, were you near like a hospital, EMPs nearby? I mean, it's just like, let's
so
find out.
when we did the actual study, yes.
Okay.
When I did it to myself to trial it, I was just in my office. So
We have much more to talk about later, so all right. Any other questions? Right over there.
This question is for either Dr. Nelsen or Dr. Anthony. How can you rationalize with an atheist that science was created by God and that science does not explain everything and it's not a result of itself?
Yeah, it was the atheist mathematician Bertrand Russell who said, what science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know. And he was a great mathematician. He did some foundational work in logic. But sometimes brilliant people say foolish things. And this is an example of that. Because if you just look at that statement, what science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know, my question for him is, how do you know this? That's not a scientific statement. You don't go to a lab and do some experiment and the result is, oh, what science cannot tell. That's a philosophical statement.
Right.
And so what people are doing is these statements are not scientific statements. They're appealing to a philosophy masked as science. It's called scientism. It's the view that science tells us everything, but that itself is not something you learn from science. And so I think just a little bit of reflection can show you that science can't tell us everything. We need philosophy, ethics. We need other domains. That's why the university is more than just a science department, right? As much as we enjoy the science department, we need a full university, and perhaps we even need a theology department.
Incredible. Anything you want to add to that, Dr. Nelsen?
yeah, I just echo what Anthony said, which is every thought comes from a worldview, and the worldview at its core are assumptions. So we have to start with these foundational assumptions, and from those assumptions, then you can move forward and make predictions and then go out and test them. So that's what's happening in Bertrand Russell's statement, is he's got some foundational assumptions that he's not making clear in the statement. And that's what's going to happen everywhere, whether I'm a Christian scientist or an atheist scientist. We're still starting with those assumptions. We might start with different assumptions, but we're moving forward in them. And so we can still both do science.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Right over there.
Dr. Nelsen, in your studies of spiders, have you discovered anything useful in them that could help the human race?
So me personally, well, I'll broaden it and say, have we study of spiders produced something useful? And I say, absolutely, yes. So there's one story I've been following quite closely was this group out of Brazil. There's a venom institute in Brazil called Butantan, world famous for venom studies. And they've been studying the world's deadliest spider, the Brazilian wandering spider. And it causes a condition called priapism, which is, you ever seen a Cialis commercial where they say if you have an erection lasting longer than, seek medical attention? That's what priapism is. So the bite causes that, right? And what happens is it releases something called, or it activates a pathway called nitrous oxide, and that causes vasodilation. And it actually turns out that your glaucoma, that can be helped through vasodilation. So they've taken that venom and they've looked at this section of the protein that causes the vasodilation. They've cut it up, put it onto a different molecule so that you can help both erectile dysfunction and glaucoma and hypertension. And so they're developing drugs from venoms. And so that's one way, that one specifically comes from a spider.
That's really fascinating too. I mean, I can see why they don't they don't bring these up in the commercial. By the way, this comes from a poisonous spider. You know, it'll help your sex life, though. But fascinating information. Any other questions? Right over there.
Doctors, how would you describe creation to one of your classes at a school that was a secular school?
I guess it depends if you have tenure or not.
Yeah.
So when I was teaching at a previous university, which wasn't a Christian university, I would always engage my students in thinking about what does it tell us about what it means to be human by the fact we can do mathematics, right? And I would just argue that we need a rich conception of what it is to be human, right? You shouldn't think too little of yourself. The fact that we can do mathematics, the fact that mathematics describes the universe, this is saying something deep and profound about what it is to be human, and encourage the students to then reflect on, for themselves, what might that imply?
Yeah. Yes. So similarly, if we were doing it in biology, I wouldn't be overt about it. It would be just ask probing questions that get them to see that there's more to reality than the story that they maybe have been hearing their whole life. That there are lots and lots of mysteries that are still worth discovering, and that sometimes we need to come at them from different angles and maybe reevaluate those assumptions that we're starting with.
Right, and the scriptural story isn't inconsistent with the data.
Yeah.
The data actually works still with the scriptural story. It's the interpretation of the data that ultimately, you know, matters. And I love what you're saying. There's just, hey, let's be able to present their alternative worldviews to the data. Excellent. Any other questions? Right over there.
Hi, gentlemen. I've always been in love with paleontology, and only quite recently, this past Easter, I've reconnected with my faith. But I am still struggling with marrying both science and faith, especially with this question. The ancient prehistoric world existed, and how do you explain the existence of that if God only created the world in 7 days?
Yes, so I think that we're not denying the data, right? We have to go and really look at what the data are, right? And so I myself, when I finished grad school, I did a postdoc, and I did it in paleontology. So we spent a lot of time at fossil the dinosaur digs and bringing up things. So it's absolutely, right, we've got lots and lots of evidence of the geologic column and all the different organisms that you find within it. And so the puzzle becomes like, how do you understand this from a different set of assumptions to begin with? And, you know, that's an active area of research, right? So I don't get turned off by not necessarily having all of the answers and being certain on how to address everything. I get excited by it. It energizes me that I get to think about these problems and continue to work on them. I know that maybe that isn't like exactly the kind of answer that you're looking for, but I think that that's a good place to start the journey towards going deeper, is to remind yourself of that the journey is the point, the discovery is the point, and every time you ask a question and you seek to find an answer for it, it's just going to open up more questions, not answer it, right? I love research. The more research I do, the more questions I have. I don't answer questions, I ask more of them, right?
But Dr. Nelsen, the question I think is really interesting, because you have a worldview that posits that there was life that existed for millions of years, you know, and then you have, according to the Bible, life beginning, you know, 6,000 years, around 6,000 years. And then, you know, that's a big fundamental difference there. What do you do with that?
I would reevaluate both of those statements, right? How do we know that what the age of the Earth is, right? And so I'm going to look at the radiometric arguments, and I'm going to look to see, are there evidences or other observations that I can make that would say that something else is going on here, or I need to consider it more deeply, right? So I'm going to do my science, and I'm going to be true to what the data are here. And at the same time, I'm also going to go back to theology and say, okay, 6,000 years, where does that come from? Is it really that, or is that something that I've been carrying with me or I've been taught to believe? And I have to evaluate both. And I'm going to work through the tension between both of them by saying, okay, if I change this assumption, where does this lead, right? If I change this, where does this lead? And I have to go back and forth between them and bring them together and compare them and say, what is this saying? How is it true to itself? How is this true to itself? And wrestle with that, right?
So I'm gonna press a little bit more.
Go
so
ahead.
Based upon your study and your research, what's your conclusion?
I don't, so if we're going to be nitpicky on the 6,000 years, I don't think that that number is something that I have to live and die by, right? Specifically 6, right? I'd be more comfortable saying maybe recent, relatively recent, but I'm not going to I think people fall in love, especially within certain communities,
so we'll say
at a
thousands of
particular
years
number.
instead of millions of years then.
So I think that on the science side of things, so let me answer it from the science side. Radiometric dating makes sense. It certainly has a logical kind of, and you could probably speak more to like the logic of radiometric dating. But there are geological observations that make me think that something else is going on in addition to this, that there's a richer, fuller picture. And I don't know how to fully address that. That's a very deep problem. But it's one that I have to live within the tension of, because there are other reasons, other sides of biology or other questions within biology that still draw me towards a creator without knowing exactly what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I might just add, you're pointing out that when you take theology and science, you try and put them together, some questions arise. There's some nice compatibility, both point to a creator, it fits together, but then when you get into detail, issues arise.
Yeah.
I'll just point out, that isn't just what happens when you combine theology with science, it's what happens when you combine science with science. You look at general relativity, the theory of the big, and you look at quantum mechanics, the theory of the small. We don't know how those fit together.
Yeah.
We don't know how science fits with science, right? Within theology, there were questions we can ask within theology itself. So there's questions within theology, there's questions within science. No wonder there's going to be questions when you try and put the two together. But I think the project is a good project to say, look at science, get into the universe that points to a creator. It harmonizes Genesis, verse 1, it lines up perfectly. And now let's get into the work, and there's going to be questions that arise, but we have eternity to investigate these questions, to study these questions. And if we didn't have those questions, how dull would it be, right?
Yeah, do I have to have an answer to everything to be able to move forward? And for me, I think that because of eternity, no. I have to be able to move forward and journey towards the answer in spite of not having a definite,
But there is some exciting stuff happening. You look at genetics, you can look that there's a common ancestor to humanity. So as we do different lines of investigation, things are emerging saying, there is compatibility here where one might have once thought there wasn't compatibility.
Yeah.
Right. And, I'm just going back here too, which I think is really fascinating to this. And I think the question is, though, someone who accepts the biblical worldview is then confronted by these other worldviews. One, primarily, that states our world has naturalistic origins, and evolution can be, is part of millions of years. A lot of assumptions going that. So how does one who is a Bible believer then navigate through that when these other theories are very much in contradiction with the biblical worldview? I'm not just talking about how you process things. I'm talking about where there is there is a contradiction. If I accept the biblical worldview that life began thousands of years ago, I cannot accept that that life began millions of years ago. What do I do there?
I think the first part I would push back on would be, it's a mistake. It feels like the question is coming from a place where it's like, hey, they seem like they have all the answers here. And if I reject that, then I'm left with what, right? How do I answer this?
Right.
And I would start by saying that's not a true understanding of what's taking place, right? And I think what you pointed out is right? That no matter what worldview you're coming from, the worldview makes sense because it's kind of like comes out of or creates an explanation for a certain set of observations. But as you continue to observe, there are lots of observations within any worldview that worldview cannot address, right? Which suggests to me that none of these worldviews are exactly right. All of them have to be journeying towards something greater. And so then I'm going to take that off the table of like, I don't expect that even within a theistic worldview that I'm going to adequately address absolutely every observation because of the limitations, right? So why do I still continue within it in spite of this particular thing that I can't address, right? And I think that's where you have to then think of again, take a step back, right? The further you zoom into a problem, the more difficult that problem is, the more lost you will feel. But at times when you step back, you can see the big picture and you can see, oh yeah, this is why, right? And that reorients yourself so that you can then go forward again and try to continue to deal with the problem.
Right.
It's not something that we just push away and deny, and, oh, I don't have to deal with this, or, okay, wash my hands of it. As a scientist, it's something I actively want to engage in, but I have to do this step back, remind myself
Zooming
of where
out.
I'm grounded from, and then go back in and continue to deal with the problem and step back again. And that's where we reevaluate, use all my different tools at my, right? So that's how I begin this journey.
No, I appreciate you explaining that, because it's like, if you accepted the biblical worldview, as you're navigating against these other worldviews and interpretation and theories, there are moments you're just not going to understand things, and it's okay to temporarily put it on the back burner while you're trying to understand other facets.
And you got to remember that the talking heads that you hear on YouTube, I mean, we're talking heads here, but the talking heads you hear on YouTube or on TV or whatever, they're equivalent to televangelists when it comes to science.
Right.
So they can make something sound very, very certain, but when you get into the details, you will see that it breaks down, because all the worldviews suffer from this.
Right. Fantastic. Any other questions? Right over there.
I guess this is for either one of you who might want to answer. Isn't it insulting to people who have spent time and money researching and proving theories to discredit their findings by saying evolution isn't real?
We'll start with you, Dr. Bosman.
Yeah, I don't think either one of us said evolution isn't real in the sense that change over time, variety. But the question is the worldview a whole? And that's not something you discover as a scientist. That's something you bring with you. There was a recent study of scientists who are atheists, and it looked at the reasons of why they're atheist. And it found that their atheism preceded their science. It's not that they became scientists, then became atheists.
Right.
Rather, it was they were already atheists, and they brought that with them to their science. Right? So by large, there's exceptions to this, but the overall trend was this. And so when we ask questions about, is the theory of evolution adequate as a full explanation to explain human origins and where we came from, it's no longer just a question of biology, it's a question of worldview. And that's where we're challenging that level of the worldview difference.
All right. Dr. Nelsen, anything you want to add to that?
Well, just as the idea of like disproving, right? I'm going to kind of zero in on that. I've put out ideas myself, written papers, and if somebody came along and showed me where I was wrong, I would be happy for it, not sad, because I want, the science grows, our knowledge grows by community, and community takes conversation, and conversation means that I need people of different worldviews. I need people from different perspectives to say, well, what about, but you haven't considered, because the only way that it's going to go forward is in that community through that conversation. So I wouldn't think that at least my science colleagues would be upset with me saying, but they may question, well, are you right? And that's a conversation, and I want to have that conversation, right? I just want to be at the table having the conversation.
Right, and the reason why is science is the doctrine of discovery.
Yeah.
And discovery, the doctrine of discovery invites discussion, it invites feedback.
That's right.
It's when it becomes overly dogmatic, that's where problems begin, and it's no longer science, it's, as you say, philosophy. Any other questions? Right there.
Yes, Dr. Anthony, what is the most miraculous thing you have ever discovered when it comes to numbers?
Oh, that's a great question.
See how he got excited?
Yeah, there's beautiful theorems about numbers. There's beautiful open questions about numbers. There's a lot about numbers that we don't know yet. And I'm tempted to go off on some of that right now and take an hour to lecture you about numbers, a whole area of math called number theory, which is numbers. It's fantastic. But one of the things I find miraculous, and this is going back to the statement of Eugene Wigner, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, is just the fact that we can use numbers to describe the world. So Albert Einstein, he said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that we can comprehend it, right? That we've been given this gift of the language of mathematics to describe the universe. And it really is, it's a gift, right? It's like why, I don't quite understand why we are able to do this, why it's so useful, and yet we find ourselves with this ability to make sense of the fabric of reality. And so I think that's an incredible gift.
Wonderful. This has been a tremendous conversation. My brain is exploding right now. We could keep talking a lot about this, so thank you, both of you. Tonight, we've explored how math reveals order and how biology uncovers design. But most of all, we've seen that science and faith together can lead us to something deeper, the heart of a creator who wants to be known. God isn't afraid of your questions. In fact, he's the one that gave you the curiosity to ask them. Faith and science are not opposites. They are both an invitation to wonder. Not enemies, but explorers on the same journey. God tells us in Jeremiah 29, verse 13, "You will seek me and find me when you seek for me with your whole heart." And that's what science is best at, a form of seeking. And God promises that if you truly seek him, you will find him. So keep exploring, keep asking, keep seeking, and as long as you have an open heart, you're never far from finding him. Thanks for spending this time with us. We'll see you next time right here on Hope at Night.